The Billionaire's Heir, a legacy reclaimed. Before you watch this video, don't forget to subscribe, like, and comment from where you're speaking. Get ready for a story that will send chills down your spine. Spring had arrived on the coast of California, with a softness that cruelly contrasted with the storm about to break in the life of Isabella Cruz. The sun set over the Pacific, painting Villa Serenity, the mansion owned by her husband, the ruthless hotel magnate Alexander Thorne, in hues of gold. The evening light filtered through the enormous windows of the main living room, where more than 200 guests from the Californian elite enjoyed the annual charity gala hosted by the couple. Isabella, in her turquoise dress that highlighted the sparkle of her brown eyes, moved among the guests with the elegance of someone born with a silver spoon, though her smile hid an anxiety that gnawed at her soul. In her handbag, carefully tucked away, she carried a secret that would change the course of her existence: a positive pregnancy test. After 2 years of marriage to Alexander, she could finally give him the news they had both hoped for, or so she believed. "Could we speak privately?" she whispered into her husband's ear, who was engaged in an animated conversation with the French ambassador and his wife. The icy glare Alexander gave her would have frozen hell itself. With a courteous apology to his companions, he delicately took Isabella's elbow and led her to his private study, maintaining a perfect smile that didn't reach his eyes. "What could be so important as to interrupt me in the middle of a crucial conversation?" he asked, with terrifying calm once the door closed behind them. Isabella, with trembling hands, pulled the pregnancy test from her bag. "We're going to be parents, Alexander." The silence that followed was more painful than any scream. Alexander took the small object between his fingers, examining it as if it were a suspicious contract. His features, carved as if from marble, revealed no emotion. "Whose is it?" The question hit Isabella like a slap. Her knees buckled, forcing her to lean against the mahogany desk. "What are you implying? It's yours, of course." Alexander's laugh resonated, cold and humorless. "Please, Isabella, we both know I can't have children. The doctors were very clear about that." The world stopped for Isabella. "What are you talking about? You never told me." "I saw no need to share that information. Our marriage was always a convenient arrangement, a merger of hotel empires. I never promised you a fairy tale." But tears began to roll down Isabella's cheeks, blurring the perfect makeup she had spent hours applying. "You're lying. You're saying this to hurt me, to justify your absences, your infidelities." Alexander's face darkened. In his black eyes, a flicker of contained fury shone. "So now I'm the unfaithful one. How convenient, darling. But this theater is over." Alexander walked towards the door, opening it wide. The murmur of the party invaded the room like a wave. Without looking back, he uttered the words that would mark a before and after. "I want you out of my house tonight. Tomorrow, my lawyers will contact you." Isabella felt the air leave her lungs. "You can't be serious. You can't just throw me out like this in front of everyone." Alexander's smile was that of a predator. "Watch me." He returned to the living room with a determined stride, and raising a champagne glass, he caught everyone's attention. The clinking of glass imposed an expectant silence. "Dear friends, I regret to interrupt this wonderful evening with a personal announcement. As many of you know, honesty and loyalty are fundamental values in my life and in my businesses." His voice, trained in 1,000 boardroom meetings, filled every corner of the room. "That is why I am forced to inform you that my marriage to Isabella has come to an end tonight." A murmur of surprise ran through the room. Isabella, paralyzed in the doorway of the study, felt every gaze pierce her like a dagger. "The reasons are strictly personal, but I trust you will respect our privacy during these difficult times. The party continues, of course. The children of the Foundation deserve our unconditional support." With those words, Alexander had sealed her fate. The guests, after the initial shock, resumed their conversations with greater intensity, fueling the nascent scandal with theories and conjectures. Eleanor Thorne, Alexander's mother, hurried towards Isabella with a horrified expression. At 70, she maintained the dignity and elegance that had characterized her all her life. "What happened, my dear child?" she whispered, taking Isabella's hands in hers. "I'm pregnant, Eleanor, and Alexander says it can't be his. He says he can't have children." Eleanor's eyes widened in surprise and then narrowed with understanding. "My son is lying. That pride of his, just like his father's." Before she could continue, Victoria Hayes, the company's legal director and, according to rumors, Alexander's occasional lover, approached with a thinly disguised smile. "Isabella, dear, I've called a taxi. It's waiting for you at the back entrance. To avoid discomfort." The humiliation was complete. With what little dignity she had left, Isabella went to her room, where she packed some personal belongings in a small suitcase. Tears blurred her vision as she looked one last time at what had been her home for 2 years. Photos of her wedding, vacations, moments she thought were happy. Everything had been an elaborate lie. As she descended the service stairs, she met Sophia Thorne, Alexander's younger sister, who was waiting with an afflicted expression. "I can't believe what my brother is doing," she said, hugging her tightly. "This won't stand, I promise you." Isabella gently pulled away. "Don't interfere, Sophia. You know your brother. His pride is stronger than any feeling. But the baby—" "This baby and I will be fine," Isabella replied, placing a protective hand on her stomach. "I promise you." The taxi awaited her in the rain that had begun to fall, as if the sky wept with her. Before getting in, she looked one last time at the illuminated mansion, where the music and laughter continued as if nothing had happened. She silently vowed she would never return to that place, that she would never beg for the love or recognition of a man incapable of feeling. Do you think Isabella will ever find true happiness after such a betrayal? What do you believe motivated Alexander to act so cruelly? Share your thoughts in the comments. 5 years later, Alexander Thorne gazed at the city from the window of his office on the top floor of the skyscraper that housed the headquarters of Thorne Hotels and Resorts. At 42, he was the most influential businessman in the Spanish tourism sector, with properties on 3 continents. However, the premature wrinkles on his forehead and the gray hairs beginning to appear at his temples revealed the price of his success. "The numbers for the last quarter are concerning, Alexander." Victoria, now his official girlfriend and legal director of the group, commented. "The expansion in Latin America is costing more than anticipated." Alexander barely heard her. The same dream had tormented him the night before, Isabella holding a crying baby with his own face. He always woke up at the same moment when he tried to touch the child, and it vanished from his fingers. "Are you listening to me?" Victoria's voice pulled him back to reality. "Of course. Prepare a detailed report for the board meeting. I don't want any surprises at tomorrow's meeting." The international expansion had been his big gamble, but also his biggest strategic mistake. To finance it, he had had to open the company's capital, becoming a hostage to shareholders who didn't share his long-term vision. His control over the empire he had built weakened day by day. His phone interrupted his thoughts. It was Eleanor, his mother. "Son, will you come for lunch on Sunday? I haven't seen you in weeks." "I have a lot of work, Mother. Perhaps next month." Eleanor's sigh conveyed all her disappointment. "Alexander, you can't go on like this. Ever since Isabella left—" "Don't mention her name," he cut her off sharply. "That woman no longer exists to me. That woman carried your child in her womb when you threw her out like a criminal. My grandchild, whom I've never met." Alexander closed his eyes, trying to control the rage that always surged when someone mentioned that episode. "You know perfectly well that child couldn't be mine." "But what if it was?" Eleanor challenged. "Did you ever consider that the doctors might be wrong? Or do you prefer to believe you're sterile rather than accept the possibility that you abandoned your own flesh and blood. Alexander hung up without answering. His mother had never understood, had never seen Isabella as the opportunist she was. She had entered his life with the excuse of a business merger between their families, seducing him with her apparent innocence and serene beauty. When he discovered her infidelity, he didn't hesitate to cut ties. But deep down, a doubt gnawed at him. What if his mother was right? What if the doctors had been wrong? He had spent 5 years building a shell around that possibility, refusing to investigate, to search, to know. The annual hotel group party was in full swing at Villa Serenity. 5 years after the scandal, no one dared to mention Isabella's name in Alexander's presence, but rumors about her whereabouts were frequent in high society circles. Some said she lived in Argentina, others that she had returned to her parents in London. No one knew for sure what had become of her. Alexander clinked glasses with his guests, displaying a smile he didn't feel, when the unmistakable roar of an approaching helicopter broke the harmony of the evening. He wasn't expecting anyone else. All the important guests had already arrived. The aircraft landed on the private helipad he had recently built, a symbol of his power and exclusivity. Time seemed to stop for Alexander when he recognized Isabella. She was more beautiful than ever, in a red dress that contrasted with her sun-kissed skin. Her hair, once waist-length, now framed her face in a more mature and sophisticated cut. But what truly paralyzed his heart were the 4 children accompanying her, identical to each other, with the same dark hair and the same piercing eyes that looked at him from the mirror every morning. Silence fell over the party like a shroud. Isabella advanced among the guests, with the confidence of someone who knows exactly what she's doing, guiding the 4 little ones, who remained dignified and in perfect order around her. She stopped in front of Alexander, whose face had lost all color. "Good evening, Alexander." Her voice was calm, almost cordial. "It's been a long time." Unable to utter a word, Alexander gazed at the 4 children who observed him with curiosity. They must have been about 4 years old, perhaps 5. "We need to talk about the empire your children will inherit someday," Isabella continued, taking an envelope with documents from her purse. "I think you'll be interested to know that I hold 15% of your company's shares, enough to demand a seat on the board of directors." Alexander's world crumbled around him. The 4 children were living proof of his mistake, his terrible error. And now Isabella was back, not as the victim he had expelled that spring night, but as a powerful woman ready to claim what was rightfully hers. She had come for revenge, for money, for vindication. As he watched those 4 little ones who were his spitting image, Alexander Thorne knew that nothing would ever be the same. The house of cards he had built on lies and pride was beginning to collapse, and the worst was yet to come. Follow us for updates. What do you think Isabella's true intentions are? Will Alexander's empire survive this unexpected challenge? Share your predictions. The first rays of the Mediterranean sun filtered through the curtains of the master bedroom at Villa Serenity. But Alexander Thorne had been awake for hours. Insomnia had become his faithful companion since the previous night, when Isabella and those 4 children, his sons, had burst into his life like a tsunami threatening to sweep everything away. The guests had left amidst murmurs and indiscreet glances, eager to spread the scandal in their social circles. Victoria, with a tense jaw and eyes full of contained fury, had remained by his side like an ice statue, calculating every move. Eleanor, his mother, had embraced the little ones with tears in her eyes, instantly recognizing the familiar features in those childlike faces. Rory, Gabriel, Matt, and Julian. Isabella had introduced the quadruplets with maternal pride. "Your grandsons, Lady Eleanor." Now, in the solitude of his room, Alexander gazed at a photograph he had kept hidden at the bottom of a drawer. He and Isabella on their wedding day. She smiled with such genuine happiness that it was painful to look at, while he maintained his serious expression, as if even then he knew that marriage was doomed to fail. "Have you slept at all?" Victoria's voice startled him. He hadn't heard her enter. "How could I?" he replied, hastily putting away the photograph. "I have 4 children I didn't know about, and an ex-wife who owns enough shares in my company to overthrow me." Victoria approached, wrapping him in a calculated embrace. "You shouldn't worry so much. My contacts at the firm are already investigating how she got those shares. If there was any irregularity, we'll find it." Alexander pulled away abruptly. "You haven't seen those children, Victoria. They're identical to me. They're mine." The reality of those words hit him hard. For 5 years I lived convinced of a lie. "And if that's exactly what she wants you to think?" Victoria's voice dripped with sweet venom. "It wouldn't be the first time someone used children to manipulate a powerful man." Alexander shook his head. He couldn't keep listening to those insinuations. He needed answers, and there was only one person who could provide them. The mansion Isabella had rented on the outskirts of Los Angeles was considerably more modest than Villa Serenity, but it exuded exquisite taste. Perfectly manicured gardens surrounded the property, and the sound of children's laughter floated from the back pool. Alexander remained in his car for a moment, gathering the courage to face reality. Finally, he pressed the doorbell and waited, his heart pounding in his chest as if it wanted to escape. An older woman with a kind demeanor opened the door. "Mr. Thorne, I presume?" she said, with a distinct South American accent. "Mrs. Cruz is expecting you in the back garden." As he followed the woman through the house, Alexander noticed details that revealed the children's presence. Carefully arranged toys, colorful drawings framed on the walls, photographs documenting moments he had never witnessed. Each image was a stab to his conscience, a reminder of everything he had missed. Isabella was seated at an elegant garden table, a teacup in her hands, and documents spread before her. She was dressed simply but elegantly, and the breeze played with her hair. Seeing him, a faint smile appeared on her lips, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Good morning, Alexander. I must confess, I didn't expect to see you so soon." He sat opposite her, unable to disguise his discomfort. "We need to talk." "Of course. Where do you want to start? With your children? With the company shares? Or perhaps with the 5 years that have passed since you threw me out of your life like a criminal?" The coldness in her voice contrasted with the memory of the sweet, passionate woman she had been. Alexander understood that time and pain had transformed her. "With the children," he finally replied. "How is it possible? The doctors told me." "The doctors were wrong," Isabella interrupted firmly. "Or perhaps they lied. Or perhaps it was you who preferred to believe a lie, rather than trust your wife." Guilt twisted in Alexander's stomach like a venomous snake. "Where are they?" "At school. They are normal children, Alexander, despite the extraordinary circumstances of their conception and birth. They go to school, they have friends, they play sports. They've grown up without a father, but they haven't lacked love. Why didn't you look for me when they were born? Why wait 5 years?" Isabella's laugh sounded bitter. "Are you serious asking me that? You publicly humiliated me. You accused me of infidelity. You threw me out of your house without a penny. And you expected me to run to you when I discovered I was expecting not 1, but 4 of your children." Alexander lowered his gaze, unable to meet the intensity of her eyes. "What do you want now, Isabella? Revenge? Money? I want what's fair for my children. I didn't come to destroy you, although I could with what I know about your businesses. I came because one of them, Matt, needs you. He has developed a rare medical condition that requires specialized treatment, and for that, we need your DNA." The revelation fell on Alexander like a cold shower. "What's wrong with Matt?" For the first time, Isabella's mask of strength cracked. her eyes filled with tears she refused to shed. A rare autoimmune disease. Symptoms started 6 months ago. We've consulted specialists across Europe. The treatment he needs must be personalized, based on his complete genetic information. We need samples of your DNA. Alexander felt the world stop. One of his sons, a child he didn't know, but who carried his blood, was sick. While he had dedicated himself to accumulating wealth and power, his own children had grown up without his presence, without his support. "I'll do whatever it takes," he said, his voice broken. "Whatever it takes." Isabella nodded, allowing herself a moment of vulnerability. "Thank you." An uncomfortable silence settled between them, filled with unspoken words and painful memories. "How did you get the shares?" Alexander finally asked, trying to steer the conversation back to more familiar ground. Isabella smiled with a mix of pride and defiance. "I finished my business administration studies while raising 4 babies. It wasn't easy, but I had powerful motivation. When my aunt's inheritance was finally released after a long legal battle, I invested strategically. Your international expansion was rushed, Alexander. You made mistakes any freshman student would have avoided. When the shares fell, I was waiting to buy them." Alexander couldn't help but crack an ironic smile. "You were always smarter than me. It's not about intelligence, but about perspective. You only saw numbers and profits. I saw people, needs, real opportunities." The arrival of the children from school interrupted their conversation. Childish voices filled the house, approaching the garden like a whirlwind of energy. "Mommy, Matt won the science fair," one of them announced, bursting into the garden followed by his 3 brothers. All 4 stopped dead in their tracks upon seeing Alexander. The silence that followed was the most painful Alexander had ever experienced. 4 pairs of eyes, exact replicas of his own, studied him with a mix of curiosity and wariness. "Children," Isabella said in a calm voice. "This is Alexander Thorne, your father." Meanwhile, at Villa Serenity, Victoria Hayes was having a phone conversation that would change the course of events. "Dad, she's back, and she's not alone." Albert Hayes, owner of Thorne Hotels and Resorts' rival hotel chain, smiled on the other end of the line. For years, he had awaited an opportunity to get revenge on Alexander, who had snatched several important contracts from him using methods that bordered on illegal. "Are you sure they're his children?" he asked cautiously. 4 children identical to him, no doubt. "Interesting. Very interesting. Stay close to the situation and keep me informed. This could be the opportunity we've been waiting for." Victoria hung up, looking at the photograph of Alexander and Isabella she had found in the room. With a gesture of contempt, she threw it in the wastebasket. No one, least of all that woman from the past, was going to stand between her and her plans. At the headquarters of Thorne Hotels and Resorts, the news of Isabella's reappearance and the 4 heirs had spread like wildfire. The board of directors had called an emergency meeting. This could completely destabilize the company, argued Robert Mendez, one of the most senior board members. Shareholders are nervous. Shares have fallen 3% this morning alone. We must issue an official statement, another suggested. Something to calm the markets. And what do you propose we say? Asked Sophia Thorne, who had taken over the corporate social responsibility department after her sister-in-law left. That my brother discovered 5 years later that he has 4 children? That he has been living a lie? That our former COO has returned with enough shareholder power to challenge the board? The silence that followed revealed the gravity of the situation. No one had a satisfactory answer. Meanwhile, in the modest rented mansion, Alexander faced the most difficult moment of his life, meeting his children. The 4 boys looked at him with expressions ranging from curiosity to open hostility. "Why did you never come to see us?" asked Rory, who seemed older, though Isabella had explained they were born just minutes apart. The question, direct and innocent, hit Alexander harder than any adult accusation. I believed you weren't my children," he replied sincerely. "The lies had caused enough damage already. But we look like you," Gabriel, the quietest of the four, observed. "Everyone says so, I know, and I regret every day not having seen it sooner." Matt, the sick child, remained slightly apart, observing him with eyes that seemed to hold a wisdom inappropriate for his age. "Are you going to help me get better?" he finally asked. Alexander felt his heart break into 1,000 pieces. He knelt in front of the little one, looking him in the eyes. "I will do everything in my power to make you well. I promise you." Julian, the most restless, interrupted impatiently. "Does that mean you're going to live with us? Will we be a normal family?" The question hung in the air. Alexander looked at Isabella, seeking an answer, but her expression was inscrutable. "I don't know if we can be a normal family," he finally replied. "But I do know that I want to get to know you, to be present in your lives if you give me a chance." The four children exchanged glances, communicating in that silent language that only siblings, especially multiples, seem to understand. "You'll have to work very hard," Rory declared, with a seriousness that brought a smile to Alexander's face. 5 years is a lot of overdue homework. That night, as he drove back to Villa Serenity, Alexander understood the magnitude of the mistake he had made. It wasn't just about having lost Isabella or having rejected his children. It was about having built his life on false foundations, pride, distrust, the fear of truly loving. The lights of Los Angeles twinkled in the distance, reflecting in the ocean like fallen stars. He remembered a conversation with his mother years ago, shortly after meeting Isabella. "Be careful, son," Eleanor had warned him. "That woman could be the one who finally melts the ice inside you, and thawing is always painful." How right she was. The ice was melting, and the pain was unbearable. But he also felt something else, something he had forgotten. Hope. A small light breaking through the cracks in the fortress he had built around his heart. His phone rang. It was Victoria. "Where have you been all day? The board is in crisis. They need you to show up first thing tomorrow." "I'll be there," he replied mechanically. "You've seen her, haven't you?" "You've been with her?" Victoria's accusing tone suddenly irritated him. "I've met my sons, Victoria. My sons." The silence on the other end of the line spoke louder than any answer. "We'll talk tomorrow," Alexander concluded, cutting the call. Upon arriving at Villa Serenity, he found it plunged into an oppressive silence. The ghosts of the past seemed to lurk in every corner. He went directly to his study and opened the drawer where he kept his most prized possession, an old pocket watch that had belonged to his grandfather. "Never abandon your own," the old man had told him on his deathbed. "I did, and it has been the biggest mistake of my life." Alexander had never fully understood those words. His grandfather had been a pillar of the family, a respected and loved man. Whom had he abandoned? What secret had he taken to his grave? As he contemplated the watch, he realized that he was repeating family patterns he didn't even know. The fear of loving, the fear of betrayal, the distrust. Where did they really come from? The sound of the helicopter hovering over the mansion pulled him from his thoughts. It was the local news, hungry for images of the scandal that already occupied the digital headlines. Hotel magnate Alexander Thorne discovers he has 4 heirs. His empire was beginning to falter, but for the first time in years, Alexander Thorne was not worried about money or power. He had 4 much more important reasons to fight: Rory, Gabriel, Matt, and Julian. His sons. Comment below. What do you think Alexander's grandfather's secret means for his own journey? Will Alexander truly be able to break free from his past patterns? The UCLA Medical Center in Los Angeles, with its imposing facilities and reputation as one of the best medical centers in the United States, commanded respect and hope in equal measure. Alexander Thorne, sitting in a cold waiting room, experienced an unfamiliar vulnerability. Tests to determine his genetic compatibility with Matt had been scheduled urgently, thanks to his contacts and influence. Beside him, Isabella casually leafed through a magazine, though it was evident she wasn't paying attention to its content. The dark circles under her eyes revealed nights of insomnia and worry about her son's health. "How long has he been sick?" Alexander asked, breaking the uncomfortable silence. Isabella looked up, surprised by the question. "The first symptoms appeared 6 months ago. At first, we thought it was a simple cold that wouldn't clear up. Then came the joint pain, constant fatigue, inexplicable fevers." Her voice cracked slightly, but she recomposed herself with that strength Alexander had come to admire. "We consulted specialists in Buenos Aires where we lived. When the diagnosis was confirmed, I knew we had to return to the US. We needed your DNA for personalized treatment. Why didn't you contact me directly? Why the dramatic entrance at the party?" A bitter smile played on Isabella's lips. "Would you have believed a simple text or call after 5 years? Would you have accepted that those children were yours without seeing them? I needed you to see them, to recognize your own image in them." Alexander couldn't argue with her logic. Distrust had always been his biggest flaw, a shield he had built since childhood. "Mr. Thorne," a nurse called from the doorway. "Dr. Evans will see you now." The specialist, a middle-aged man with a calming demeanor, received them in his office. The walls were covered with diplomas and international recognitions. "Matt's condition is uncommon, but not hopeless," he explained after reviewing the preliminary results. "His immune system is attacking certain cells in his own body, causing inflammation and tissue damage. With the right treatment, he can lead a completely normal life." "And for that treatment, you need my DNA?" Alexander asked. "Exactly. The most effective therapy requires designing specific monoclonal antibodies based on the patient's complete genetic profile. For that, we need samples from both parents. The good news is, according to these preliminary analyses, you are undoubtedly Matt's biological father." Those words, spoken with aseptic scientific objectivity, confirmed what Alexander's heart already knew. They were his children. They always had been. "What are the next steps?" he asked, determined to do whatever was necessary. "We'll need to perform a bone marrow extraction. It's an invasive procedure, but fundamental for the treatment. It will be done under general anesthesia." Alexander nodded, though a shiver ran down his spine. Since childhood, hospitals had provoked an irrational terror in him, the result of a traumatic experience when, at 8 years old, he had undergone emergency surgery after an accident. "We'll do it tomorrow," he decided, ignoring his fear. "How long will it take for the treatment to be ready after that?" "About 2 to 3 weeks. In the meantime, we will continue with the current therapy to control the symptoms." Upon leaving the consultation, Alexander noticed Isabella observing him with an unreadable expression. "What's wrong?" he asked. "Nothing. It's just, I didn't expect you to agree so quickly. I remember you more calculating." "People change, Isabella. Or perhaps you simply never really knew me. Or perhaps it's you who never knew yourself," she replied softly. That afternoon, Alexander visited Villa Serenity to collect some personal belongings. He had decided to temporarily move into a hotel near the hospital to be available during Matt's treatment process. His surprise was immense when he found Eleanor, his mother, playing with the 4 children in the garden. "Mom, what is this?" Eleanor stood up with her characteristic dignity, while the children continued to play happily with a dog Alexander didn't remember seeing before. I invited Isabella and my grandsons to spend the afternoon. This is their home, too. Isabella and I are divorced, Mother, and this house is mine. Eleanor looked at him with that expression that, since childhood, made him feel small and insignificant. This house has been the Thorne family home for 3 generations. It belongs to the family, not just to you. And those children are Thornes, whether you like it or not. Alexander ran a hand through his hair, frustrated. Things aren't that simple. Of course they are. You have 4 wonderful children and an ex-wife who, despite all the pain you caused her, has had the generosity to return so you can meet your children and help save one of their lives. What could be simpler than that? At that moment, Matt approached them cautiously. Of the 4, he was the most reserved, perhaps due to his illness. "Grandma Eleanor says you have pictures from when you were little," he said, addressing Alexander. "Can I see them? I want to know if I look like you." Alexander's heart leaped at such a simple yet profound request. "Of course, they're in my study. Come, I'll show you." As they climbed the stairs, Alexander felt Matt's small hand reaching for his. That simple gesture of childlike trust disarmed all his defenses. In the study, he pulled out albums he hadn't looked at in years, photographs of his childhood, family vacations. School sports competitions. "Look, here I was about your age." He pointed to an image where he appeared with a swimming trophy. Matt studied the photograph intently. "I have your same eyes and nose, but Mom says I have her smile." "That's true, your mother has a beautiful smile." The child nodded seriously. "That's why I smile little, to save it for special occasions, like she does." The observation, so sharp, yet so innocent, deeply moved Alexander. These children had inherited not only his physical features, but also his observational skills, his sensitivity hidden behind a facade of serenity. "Tomorrow I'll have some tests at the hospital," Alexander said, trying to explain the procedure in a way a 5-year-old could understand. "Those tests will help the doctors prepare the medicine you need." Matt looked at him with his dark eyes, full of a wisdom uncharacteristic of his age. "Are you scared?" "I'm scared of needles." Alexander couldn't lie in the face of that gaze so similar to his own. "Yes, I'm scared. I haven't liked hospitals since I was little." "Me neither," Matt confessed. "But Mom says sometimes you have to be brave even if you're scared. Your mother is a very wise woman." Meanwhile, at the headquarters of Thorne Hotels and Resorts, Victoria Hayes held a closed-door meeting with several members of the board of directors. "Alexander is emotionally compromised," she argued with calculated passion. "These personal decisions are seriously affecting the company. Shares continue to fall. Investors are nervous." "What exactly do you propose?" asked Robert Mendez, who had always been loyal to Alexander. "A vote of no confidence. We need Alexander to take a temporary leave while he resolves his family matters. I can assume executive management during that period." The board members exchanged uneasy glances. What Victoria was proposing was practically a corporate coup. "We would need the support of at least 60% of the shareholders," another board member recalled. "And Alexander controls 40%. Victoria smiled confidently. "Not anymore. With the 15% his ex-wife owns, his control has significantly diminished. And I have reason to believe that Isabella Cruz would be willing to support this motion." What Victoria didn't mention was the conversation she had had that morning with her father. Albert Hayes had proposed a merger between the 2 hotel chains, with him as chairman of the resulting group and Victoria as CEO. The first step, remove Alexander Thorne from power. The morning of the intervention, Alexander woke startled by a recurring nightmare. He saw himself, a child, abandoned in a hospital, while his father walked away without looking back. The fear of needles, of anesthesia, of the absolute vulnerability of being unconscious in the hands of strangers, paralyzed him. "Everything will be fine," Isabella assured him. who had come to the hospital to accompany him, though she maintained an evident emotional distance. "It's a routine procedure." The anesthesiologist explained the process, while the nurses prepared the necessary equipment. Alexander, dressed in the hospital gown, had never felt so defenseless. "When you wake up, it will all be over," the doctor said, as the anesthesia began to take effect. "Think of something pleasant as you fall asleep." The image that came to his mind in those last moments of consciousness was not of his business successes or his luxury properties. It was of 4 identical children laughing in the garden of Villa Serenity, and Isabella watching them with a mixture of pride and infinite love. When he woke up hours later, the first thing he saw was Isabella dozing in an uncomfortable chair beside his bed. She had stayed there throughout the procedure. "You came back," he whispered, his voice hoarse from intubation. Isabella opened her eyes, momentarily disoriented. "The boys wanted to know you were okay. I promised them I'd look after you." The pain in his lower back, where the bone marrow had been extracted, was intense, but Alexander barely noticed it. A more powerful sensation filled him: gratitude. "Thank you," he said simply, "for staying, for the children, for everything." Isabella averted her gaze, uncomfortable with his unusual vulnerability. "You should rest. The doctor said you can leave tomorrow if everything goes well." But when she tried to get up to leave, Alexander gently took her hand. "Stay, please. Just a little longer." And, against all odds, she stayed. Leave your comments. What do you think of Isabella's surprising change of heart? How will Alexander's past regrets shape his future decisions? In the following days, while Alexander recovered at Villa Serenity, under the care of Eleanor and the daily visits of the children, Isabella dedicated herself to investigating the company's financial situation. Her background in administration and years of experience in the sector allowed her to clearly see what others overlooked. What she discovered deeply alarmed her. The international expansion Alexander had undertaken was based on loans with abusive terms and contracts that seriously compromised the company's future viability. Someone had deliberately misadvised him, leading him towards a programmed financial disaster. That someone had a name and surname: Victoria Hayes. The Bonfire Night Festival illuminated the Californian coast, with bonfires reflecting in the ocean like stars fallen from the sky. Tradition dictated that, on the shortest night of the year, wishes written on paper and thrown into the fire would come true, while bad memories would be consumed in the purifying flames. Villa Serenity, for the first time in 5 years, buzzed with children's activity. The Quadruplets, fascinated by the celebration they had never experienced in London, ran along the private beach under the watchful eye of Eleanor, who had organized a small family party for the occasion. Alexander, still sore from the bone marrow extraction weeks earlier, watched the scene from the terrace. The crystalline laughter of his children mingled with the sound of the waves and the occasional bursts of fireworks that young people set off on the adjacent public beach. "You shouldn't be standing so long," Isabella's voice surprised him. "The doctor recommended rest." "I'm fine," he replied automatically, though the throbbing pain in his lower back contradicted his words. "How is Matt?" "The first results of the treatment are promising. The inflammation has decreased, and the fever hasn't returned in 3 days." An invisible weight lifted from Alexander's shoulders. Since learning of his son's diagnosis, he had lived with a constant fear he would never admit aloud. "I'm glad," he simply said, unable to express the magnitude of his relief. Isabella leaned on the railing next to him, contemplating the children who were now helping Eleanor prepare the bonfire. The closeness of her body, the subtle perfume she had always worn, awakened memories in Alexander that he thought were forgotten. "Do you remember our first bonfire night?" she asked, as if she had read his thoughts. "How could I forget? I took you to that hidden cove near Malibu, and we wrote our wishes, and we threw them into the fire together," Isabella continued, her gaze lost in the horizon. "I wished for us to start a family." The revelation hit Alexander hard. "You never told me that!" "You're not supposed to reveal your bonfire night wishes if you want them to come true," she smiled melancholically, though I suppose it eventually came true in a way neither of us would have imagined. The silence that followed was charged with contained emotions, unspoken words, and still open wounds. "What did you wish for that night?" Isabella finally asked. Alexander hesitated for a moment before answering. "I wished never to become like my father." The irony of that unfulfilled wish floated between them like a ghost. Alexander had repeated exactly the pattern he so feared: abandonment, absence, prioritizing work over family. "You still have time to break that cycle," Isabella said softly, surprising him with her understanding. "They need you, especially Matt." Before Alexander could reply, his phone interrupted the moment. It was Sophia, his sister. "Alexander, you have to come to the office immediately. Victoria has called an extraordinary board meeting. They're planning a vote of no confidence to temporarily remove you from management." The news left him momentarily speechless. Under what pretext? Temporary incapacity due to personal matters. They claim your family situation is affecting your business judgment and the company's stability. Fury began to boil inside Alexander. "I'll be there in 30 minutes. Hanging up, he met Isabella's inquisitive gaze. "Problems at the company," he explained curtly. "Victoria Hayes is making moves," she guessed. "I'm not surprised. I've been investigating the international expansion operations you undertook after our divorce. Someone deliberately misadvised you, Alexander. Those contracts are designed to weaken the company in the long term." Alexander looked at her in surprise. "How do you know that?" "Because I know the sector as well as you do, and because I have access to the information as a shareholder. The question is, Gios, who would benefit from the downfall of Thorn Hotels and Resorts?" The answer was obvious. Albert Hayes, Victoria's father and owner of the rival hotel chain. "I have to go," Alexander said, heading towards the house. "Enjoy the party with the children." "I'm coming with you," Isabella declared firmly. "My shares can be decisive in that vote." The glass and steel building housing the headquarters of Thorn Hotels and Resorts gleamed under the last lights of sunset. In the top-floor boardroom, the entire board of directors waited with tense expressions. When Alexander entered, followed by Isabella, a murmur of surprise rippled through the room. No one expected his ex-wife to appear alongside the man she was supposedly there to destroy. Victoria, elegantly dressed in a vibrant red suit, could not hide her discomfort at Isabella's presence. "This is a private board meeting," she said coldly. "Mrs. Cruz is not authorized to be here." "Mrs. Cruz owns 15% of the shares in this company," Alexander replied calmly. "She has every right to be present." Robert Mendez, as the longest-serving board member, spoke up. "Alexander, this meeting has been called to discuss the difficult situation facing the company. Some board members believe that your current personal circumstances may be affecting your ability to lead effectively." "In other words," Alexander interrupted, "Victoria has convinced you that I need a break while she exerts control. Am I wrong?" The uncomfortable silence confirmed his suspicion. "Before proceeding to any vote," he continued, "I would like to present some data that might change this board's perspective." With a gesture, he invited Isabella to speak. She stepped forward with the confidence of someone who knows the ground she treads perfectly. "Over the past few weeks, I have meticulously analyzed the international expansion contracts signed by this company in the last 3 years. She began projecting documents onto the giant screen in the room. "What I have discovered is, to say the least, concerning." For the next half hour, Isabella surgically exposed how the agreement signed under Victoria's advice contained hidden clauses that seriously compromised the company's long-term viability. Worse, She demonstrated how these clauses indirectly benefited Hayes' Hospitality Group, Victoria's father's company. In summary, Isabella concluded, we are facing a clear case of conflict of interest that borders on illegality. Miss Hayes has used her privileged position to systematically weaken Thorne Hotels and Resorts while strengthening her father's company. The silence that followed was so thick you could cut it with a knife. Victoria, pale with fury, stood up abruptly. This is slander. I will not allow a scorned woman who left the company 5 years ago to come here now and make baseless accusations. Baseless? Isabella smiled calmly. Every piece of data is backed by documents signed by yourself, Victoria. And as for being scorned, I remind you that it was Alexander who publicly expelled me from his life, not the other way around. Robert Mendez, visibly agitated by the revelations, intervened. I believe we must postpone any vote until these documents are verified by our legal department. That seems reasonable, Alexander agreed. Meanwhile, I suggest that Miss Hayes be temporarily suspended from her duties until this possible conflict of interest is clarified. The vote for this revisional measure was unanimous, with Victoria's compelled abstention. Before leaving the room, she stopped in front of Isabella with a look full of hatred. This won't be the end, she whispered, so only Isabella could hear her. My father and I have invested too much time in this plan for an upstart to ruin everything. Isabella held her gaze without flinching. You should have investigated my history better, Victoria. No one who has raised 4 children simultaneously is easily scared. Like this video. What do you think of Isabella's strategic genius? How will this corporate battle end? Leave your comments below. Back at Villa Serenity, the atmosphere in the car was strangely intimate. The adrenaline of the confrontation had given way to a shared calm between Alexander and Isabella. Thank you, he finally said, breaking the silence. Not just for today, but for opening my eyes about Victoria. I've been a complete idiot. You wouldn't be the first man to be manipulated by an attractive woman with a hidden agenda, she replied with an ironic smile. Besides, I have as much interest as you do in the company thriving. It's our son's future. Our son's. Those 2 words resonated in Alexander's heart like an echo of what could have been and never was. Of what perhaps could still be. Why did you really come back, Isabella? He asked, momentarily glancing away from the road to observe her profile. You could have sent your lawyers about the shares. You could have discreetly contacted me about Matt's treatment. Why the spectacular entrance at the party? Why expose yourself like that? Isabella remained silent for so long that Alexander thought she wouldn't answer. When she finally spoke, her voice held a vulnerability she hadn't shown him in years. Because I needed to see your face when you saw the boys. I needed to know if there was anything human left in you, anything of the man I fell in love with. And because they deserved to know their father, to understand where they come from, who they are, and what verdict you have rendered. Is there anything left of that man? The question floated between them like a fragile bubble that could burst with the slightest breath. I think he's struggling to get out, Isabella finally replied. But he has many demons to overcome first. Arriving at Villa Serenity, they found the bonfire night party in full swing. Eleanor had organized a small bonfire on the private beach, and the children jumped around, following the tradition of asking the purifying fire to ward off evils and bring good fortune. Rory, the most extroverted of the 4, ran towards them as soon as he saw them. Daddy, Mommy, you have to write your wishes. Grandma says it's tradition, Dad. It was the first time any of the children had called him that, and the emotional impact was so strong that Alexander had to blink to hold back the tears threatening to overflow. Gabriel approached with 2 small pieces of paper and pencils. You have to write something you want to happen and something you want to forget, he explained, with his characteristic seriousness. Then you throw them in the fire, and they come true. Isabella and Alexander exchanged a knowing glance, remembering that distant bonfire night when they were young and in love, before ambition and pride separated them. As they wrote their wishes, Matt approached his father cautiously. The treatment was working, but he still tired easily and needed special care. "What are you going to wish for, Dad?" he asked curiously. Alexander contemplated the blank paper, feeling the weight of the last 5 years, of the wrong decisions, of the lost opportunities. Finally, he wrote, "I wish to be the father my sons deserve, and the man Isabella believed I could be." "And what did you wish for?" he asked his son, carefully folding the paper so no one could read its contents. "I wished for all of us to stay together," Matt replied, with the stark sincerity of children. "You, Mom, my brothers, Grandma, like a normal family." The simplicity of the child's wish contrasted painfully with the complexity of the adult situation. Alexander hugged his son, feeling something simultaneously break and heal inside him. "That's a good wish," he murmured against the child's hair, identical to his own. "Very good." When it was time to throw the papers into the fire, the whole family formed a circle around the bonfire. Eleanor recited the traditional invocation, asking the fire to consume the bad and strengthen the good. One by one, they cast their wishes into the flames. When it was Isabella's turn, Alexander thought he saw a tear trickle down her cheek, quickly wiped away. What would she have wished for? Would there still be room in her heart for the man who had caused her so much pain? The night advanced, and the children, exhausted by the day's excitement, finally fell asleep. Eleanor retired to her room, leaving Isabella and Alexander alone on the terrace, contemplating the last embers of the bonfire and the calm sea under the full moon. "You know what's most ironic?" Isabella remarked, breaking the comfortable silence. "That when you threw me out that night, I was planning to leave you." The confession surprised Alexander. "Why?" "Because I had discovered you weren't the man I believed. You had become someone cold, obsessed with power and control, incapable of showing vulnerability or genuine affection. When I learned I was pregnant, I decided to give you one last chance. We know how that turned out. And now? Who do you think I am now?" Isabella looked him directly in the eyes, with that intensity that had always disarmed him. "That depends on you, Alexander, on the decisions you make from now on." In the distance, the last fireworks of bonfire night illuminated the sky, reminding them that, according to tradition, it was a magical night where anything was possible, even miracles. Comment below. What do you think Isabella wished for? What is the most important lesson Alexander has learned so far? The California autumn painted Villa Serenity's gardens in hues of ochre and gold. 3 months had passed since that bonfire night, which had marked a turning point in the Thorns' lives. Alexander, sitting on the porch with a steaming cup of coffee, watched his 4 sons play in the garden under Eleanor's watchful eye. The boys had started school in California, adapting with surprising ease to their new life. Matt, especially, showed clear improvement. The treatment developed thanks to Alexander's bone marrow was working better than expected. His once pale cheeks now showed a healthy color, and his energy increased daily, allowing him to play almost at the same pace as his brothers. "The results are extraordinary," Dr. Evans had commented at the last checkup. "The response to the personalized treatment has exceeded our most optimistic expectations. If it continues this way, in 6 months we could talk about full remission." Those words had lifted the invisible weight Alexander had carried on his shoulders since learning of his son's illness. A son he was only just beginning to know, but who already held an irreplaceable place in his heart. The sound of footsteps interrupted his thoughts. Isabella approached with several documents in hand, and that determined expression he knew so well. "The external audit reports have just arrived," she announced, sitting beside him. "It's worse than we thought." Following the revelations about Victoria's role in the company's financial debacle, the board had ordered a complete audit of all international operations carried out in the last 3 years. The preliminary results confirmed the suspicions, a deliberate strategy to weaken Thorn Hotels and Resorts for the benefit of Hayes Hospitality Group. "How much time do we have before the situation is irreversible?" Alexander asked, studying the graphs that showed an alarming drop in profit margins. 6 months, perhaps less," Isabella replied frankly, "unless we implement drastic changes." Over the past few weeks, they had worked together to develop a rescue plan. Their professional relationship had gradually evolved, recovering some of the complicity that had once united them. They shared the same goal: save the company their sons would one day inherit. "I have a proposal," Isabella continued, showing him a detailed strategic plan. "During my time in Argentina, I established valuable contacts with Latin American investors interested in expanding into Europe. If we reorient our expansion towards a strategic alliance, instead of direct competition with other chains, we could reverse the situation." Alexander studied the proposal carefully. It was brilliant, innovative, and, most importantly, viable. But it required a fundamental change in his business philosophy. He would have to relinquish some of the absolute control he had always exercised. This would mean completely reorganizing the board of directors, he observed, immediately identifying the most delicate implication. "And appointing new directors for key areas," Isabella nodded, "people we can fully trust." The proposal involved another significant change. Isabella would assume the role of Director of International Operations, the position she had left 5 years ago. Her experience in the Latin American market would be crucial for the plan's success. "Are you sure you want to get involved at that level?" Alexander asked. "It would mean less time with the children." A melancholic smile appeared on Isabella's lips. "I've been a full-time mother for 5 years. The children are growing, starting their school lives. It's the perfect time to resume my career, especially if it secures their future." The silence that followed was charged with meaning. Both knew that this decision would definitively alter the dynamic between them. They would no longer simply be ex-spouses united by their children, but partners in an ambitious business project. "There's something else you should know," Isabella added. "I've received an offer from Albert Hayes." Alexander visibly tensed. "What kind of offer?" "He wants to buy my shares at a price far above market value. In exchange, he would withdraw the lawsuits he's preparing against you for alleged mismanagement." The news didn't surprise Alexander. After Victoria's suspension and the initiation of the internal investigation, Albert Hayes had launched an aggressive campaign to further destabilize the company. "What did you tell him?" "That my shares are not for sale. Not to him, at least." Their gazes met, communicating without words what both knew. They were in this battle together, united by a bond stronger than past resentment. That same afternoon, as Alexander reviewed old family documents, searching for information that might be useful for the company's restructuring, he found a carved wooden box he didn't remember seeing before. Inside, yellowed letters, faded photographs, and a personal diary in the unmistakable handwriting of his grandfather, Ernest Thorn. Intrigued, he began to read. What he discovered in those pages completely changed his understanding of the family history. Ernest Thorn had not abandoned his family, as he had always been told. He had been forced to distance himself to protect them when he discovered that his partner and best friend, Richard Cruz, Isabella's grandfather, was involved in illicit businesses that could have sent both to prison. "I prefer my son to hate me, believing me a coward, than to see him suffer the consequences of my mistakes," Ernest had written in the last entry of the diary, dated shortly before his death. "Someday, when the danger has passed, I hope the truth will come to light, and he will understand that what seemed like abandonment was, in reality, the most painful act of love of my life." Alexander felt the world sway beneath his feet. All his life, he had grown up hating the memory of a grandfather he believed to be a coward, a man who had abandoned his family out of selfishness. This discovery not only rehabilitated Ernest's image, but also explained the origin of the pathological fear of abandonment that had marked generations in his family. With the diary in hand, he sought Isabella, who was helping the children with their homework in the main living room. "I need to show you something," he said, with an urgency in his voice that made her follow him without question to the study. As Isabella read the diary pages, her face reflected the same shock Alexander had felt. My grandfather was involved in illicit activities, and mine sacrificed his family relationships to protect us all. Alexander nodded. This secret has poisoned our families for generations, Isabella. My father grew up believing he had been abandoned, developing the same fear that he later transmitted to me. And you repeated the pattern, she completed, finally understanding the origin of that innate distrust that had always characterized Alexander. The fear of abandonment led you to abandon first, before being abandoned. The truth, so simple yet so profound, fell upon them like a revelation. The cycle of pain that had tormented the Thorne family for decades could finally be broken. Subscribe to our channel. What do you think of this shocking family revelation? How will this new understanding impact Alexander and Isabella's relationship moving forward? The following weeks were filled with intense work. The rescue plan proposed by Isabella was presented to the board of directors and, after an intense debate, was approved by a narrow margin. As predicted, the reorganization involved painful changes. Several executives loyal to Victoria were relieved of their duties, and new talents, many from the Latin American market, joined key positions. Albert Hayes, seeing himself deprived of his insider in the company, intensified his media and legal attacks. But the strategy designed by Isabella began to bear fruit. The first agreements with Argentinian and Mexican investors injected fresh capital and opened new markets for Thorne hotels and resorts. Most surprising to those who knew Alexander was his ability to adapt to the new shared power structure. For the first time in his career, he was learning to delegate, to trust the judgment of others, to listen to different perspectives. "You've become wiser," Eleanor observed one afternoon as they watched the children decorate the mansion for Christmas, their first celebrating all together. "I've come to understand what truly matters," he replied simply, "and it's not properties or shares." The traditional Christmas Eve dinner at Villa Serenity had always been a highlight on the social calendar. This year, however, Alexander had decided it would be an intimate family celebration. Only the closest: Eleanor, Sophia, the children, some lifelong friends, and, of course, Isabella. The main living room sparkled with Christmas decorations that the Quadruplets had helped put up. A huge natural pine dominated the space, laden with traditional ornaments and twinkling lights. Soft carols played in the background, mingling with the laughter and conversations of the guests. Matt, fully recovered after months of treatment, ran with his brothers around the table where the traditional dinner would be served. His transformation was the best gift Alexander could have received. "He looks more and more like you every day," Isabella commented, approaching with 2 glasses of sparkling cider. Not just physically, but in his determination, in his way of analyzing every situation before acting. Alexander accepted the glass, allowing himself a moment to admire the woman who, against all odds, had returned to his life. Time and shared experiences had transformed her, endowing her with a confidence and inner strength that made her even more beautiful in his eyes. "Thank you," he said simply, "for everything, for saving the company, for raising our sons wonderfully, for giving me a second chance I don't deserve." Isabella smiled with a mix of tenderness and melancholy. We all deserve second chances, Alexander. What's important is what we do with them. When it was time to sit at the table, Alexander surprised everyone by asking for silence for a special toast. With his glass raised, he looked at each person present, finally pausing on Isabella. Tonight, I want to share with all of you something I've recently discovered. That true value is not in maintaining appearances or accumulating power, but in recognizing our mistakes and working to correct them. His voice, usually firm and authoritative, trembled slightly with contained emotion. 5 years ago, I made the biggest mistake of my life. I let pride and fear push me away from the only thing truly valuable, my family. Tonight, publicly, I want to apologize to Isabella for the pain I caused her. Silent tears rolled down Eleanor's and Sophia's cheeks. The children watched the scene with curiosity and an instinctive understanding of its importance. I cannot change the past, Alexander continued, but I can offer you, Isabella, a different future. I'm not asking for us to go back to what we were. I'm asking for the opportunity to build something new, something better, based on mutual respect and love for our children. I ask for time to rebuild the trust I destroyed, to show you that I have changed, to perhaps one day win back your love. The silence that followed seemed to hold the breath of the entire world. Isabella, her eyes shining with unshed tears, finally stood up. Time has taught us both a lot, Alexander. It has shown us that what seemed like a definitive end was, in reality, just a detour on our path. Our sons are living proof that, sometimes, from the greatest pain can come the greatest blessings. Taking her glass, she raised it in a gesture that held hope and promise. To second chances, to the family we are rebuilding, to the future that awaits us, whatever its form. When the glasses clinked, sealing that unspoken pact, the quadruplets ran to embrace their parents, forming a perfect circle of love and possibilities. Outside, the warm California December enveloped the mansion in a gentle ocean breeze. The stars shone brightly over the Pacific, silent witnesses to a story that, like so many others, had needed to drift far from its origin to finally find its true destiny. In that moment of perfect harmony, Alexander understood the most valuable lesson, that sometimes what seems like abandonment can, in reality, be an act of love, and that even the deepest wounds can heal when exposed to the light of truth and forgiveness. Did this ending bring tears to your eyes? What do you think is the ultimate message of this story? Leave your comments below.